Meet Reid Lance Rosenthal, rancher, #1 best-selling award-winning author, and unabashedly, unapologetically on the right side of the outstanding issues of our generation. But don't try to fence him in. Sometimes his positions will surprise you, because Reid is definitely his own man, with his own opinions. You might love him, you might hate him, but you won't be able to stop listening. Step over to the right side with Reid.
Howdy, listeners and viewers from coast to coast, the Gulf to the 51st state, even more apropos, the Gulf to Greenland. How's that? And around the globe. Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take on video channels everywhere. Remember, folks, please give me a like, give me a subscribe, pass this on to anybody that you think would enjoy it or that it would benefit. Much appreciated. And I appreciate you listening. First of all, apologies. I've been absent for almost 4 weeks. That wasn't my original plan, but December was ugly. I'm going to tell you about it in the ranch story here in just a little bit. And we are going to go over, I have a great show planned for you, which is how the left has used violence to overthrow governments over the last 200 to 400 years. That's going to be the next show. Since we have had Christmas, Merry Christmas. Hopefully you had the best ever. And New Year's, we're just a few days past that. Happy New Year. And may we all have the best New Year's ever. The complete year, I might add. And it's certainly kind of starting out to be a corker, isn't it? Yes, it is. So here's what we're going to do today. And this is an annual tradition of mine. And I thought it would be great for the show of getting back in the saddle after an absence. First of all, I want to thank all you folks who wrote me, and there were a lot of you, saying, is everything okay? We haven't seen you on. We've been looking for the show. Really appreciate you listening. Really appreciate your concerns. And thanks. So in December, and there's a couple of lessons in this, there's a couple of lessons. And the lessons are the unexpected will always occur. And sometimes it is not all that pleasant. My first wife, whom I've been friends with for 40 plus years, and with whom I had my 2 great kids, developed breast cancer about a year and a half ago. She went through the whole rigmarole, the surgeries, the treatments, none of which are pleasant. And the doctor said, oh, you did great, and la-di-da-di-da. So her hopes were up, our hopes were up, and my kids' hopes were up. And about 8 or 9 weeks ago, really out of the blue, she started to have trouble walking, started to have trouble keeping her balance, started to have trouble speaking or remembering. Well, they decided to do a scan, which they probably should have done after the treatments, right? And the scan showed a golf ball-sized tumor in her brain. Nothing they could do. And she unfortunately passed away basically right after Christmas. And obviously, I had to make some trips relative to that during the month of December. And then a very good friend with whom I don't do book signings with him. He's a furniture maker, makes absolutely fabulous stuff, Ranchland Rustics. And we share booths together at these shows and all sorts of things. But I mean, just a great guy, peach of a guy. Really liked him. I was all lined up to pick some stuff up at his place, which is in Colorado. And we had talked, we had everything all lined up. And a few days before I was scheduled to head down there, I got a call from his wife, who's a sweetheart. And my friend had dropped dead, like suddenly, from a massive heart attack. This is a young guy who was in good shape. And by young, I mean, in his 50s. So that was kind of a shocker. It's one of those things you don't expect. Sometimes you can look at people and kind of know they're doomed. And other times you look at people and they're, full life, full of vibes, full of verve. And I also visited my 102-year-old, or about to be 102-year-old May mom, who's doing great. I mean, she has more going on than most 60-year-olds. She's a pistol, but she is 102. And there is an end to longevity at some point. So that was kind of my December. And to be quite honest with you folks, I just didn't feel like doing a show. There were too many other things going on, including with the ranch and the Yellowstone saga. Oh yeah, we'll get to that one day. So my apologies, but thank you for your concern, and I am back. He's back. So in this show, number one, I'm going to go over some current events, rat-a-tat-tat. But mostly, I'm going to go over my major prognostications for the year just past, 2025, and give you my forecasts for the year 2026, some of which I think might just kind of blow your mind. But I think in connecting the dots, I'm unfortunately right on. First of all, I think very apropos for this show is a quote. Let me call it up here for us. And this quote is from Albert Einstein. you know, yeah, not a founder, but certainly a name well known. And this is the quote. And given the fact that we are, and I have a new camera going here, so hopefully you're able to hear me, see me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Albert Einstein. A ship is always safe at the shore, but that is not what it is built for. Think about that. Very true. And in the year and the time period that we are embarking on, you might want to throw off those ropes that tether you to the dock in a stormy sea. Your chances are much better, shall we say, out on the open water. In other words, it's time to think outside the box, folks. It's time to drop that normalcy bias. It's time to imagine what is and what can be and what might be. And I might add, to start taking steps based on what you decide. Well, you got the ranch story, which was my December, and you got the quote. And what's the moral of the ranch story? Time is short, time is finite. Don't waste it. The unexpected can happen like that. All right, folks, rat-a-tat-tat. And this is going to tie into some of my prognostications, by the way. There's no shortage of stories out there, as you're well aware. I mean, it's unbelievable. In San Francisco, they passed a reparations act. I talked about reparations 6 years ago. Everybody laughed at me. Here we are. Here we are. And it's 5 million or 5 billion or 500. Who cares? San Francisco's $1 billion underwater on their budget. This is a city, folks, $1 billion underwater. But they're going to pay reparations, okay? Never mind the fact that California didn't become a state until after the Civil War, you know. And never mind that slavery was almost non existent in California. I mean, California didn't really get discovered till the gold rush. That was 1849. Okay. So San Fran is going to do reparations and they're going to pay all this money with a $1 billion budget deficit. You betcha. Okay. And then we have in New York, our buddy Kami Mandami. Kami Mandami. He has appointed a tenant relations person or started a new division and appointed a person to head it. She happens to be a communist also. What a surprise. Birds of a feather flock together. And she had a really interesting quote. This is just a day or two ago. She said, real estate should not, and I'm paraphrasing, real estate should not be individual. Property ownership should not be individual. Property ownership should be collective. And she figured it was her mission, particularly if property owners were white. Isn't that racist or like against the law or unconstitutional or something like that? What do I know? I'm just a hayseed in Wyoming. But particularly if you're white, you can look forward under her tenure to seeing your property become far less individual in terms of ownership and far more collective in terms of ownership. Wow. Okay. And of course, Mandami himself, Kami Mandami, and I brought you this quote, 2 months ago or so? He wants to control all the means of production. I mean, you have basically Mr. and Mrs. Stalin there in New York. What could go wrong? We shall see. Somali fraud, right? It's now up to about 9 billion plus or minus just in Minnesota. And I think it's opened the eyes to lots of fraud in other places. I would love to know the final. Well, I wouldn't love to know it. I can't wait to know it, and I'll probably retch when I find out. But 9 billion in fraud, which includes 78% of the Somali population 10 years after they were here still being on food stamps or welfare or some type of public, that's you and me, folks, assistance. And somewhere in the 70% percentile being on Medicaid. Oh, that's also paid for by you and I. And it seems that there's a lot of money missing. Like there was 400 million plus or minus in grants. And somehow the things that the grants were supposed to do never got done. And where is the grant money? And then we have the daycare deal in Minnesota, right? All these daycares getting literally $1 to $2 million each a year on the average, but they don't have any kids. They never had any kids. All they have is like a building with the sign daycare over it. Okay. And Tim Waltz, that fat little commie, he is pathetic. And he's in it up to his eyeballs. I'd love to see his offshore bank accounts. And Ilar Oman, who should be arrested and tried for treason, and after the trial, depending upon the outcome, at the least deported. There's other things that I think ought to happen. And all her ilk. But you're going to see more and more of this fraud uncovered over the course of the year. And it looks like some of that money went to not just personal pockets, but support of the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. Oh, and also to people on the terror watch list. I do think that this is really, really, really close, if not over the line of treason and sedition. It's certainly over the line of fraud and theft. Yeah. And of course, when did all this stuff start? It was before Tim Walz's time and before Ilhan Omar's time. Oh, that's right, with Barack Obama. He is the one that brought all these folks over. Hmm. And as president of the United States, he didn't know what was going on there. Yeah, just like he didn't know about Russiagate. Uh-huh. Okay. The repo market. I've talked to you about this. This is that emergency lending line that banks can use if they're short of cash. The repo market spiked to its highest level, I think, in 20 or 30 years, right before the end of the year. Like 110 billion, that's billion dollars, borrowed by banks in just a day or two prior to year end. That's not a good sign, folks. And the Fed, it's rumored, pumped 124 billion into the repo line so that there'd be enough money for all the banks that suddenly needed it. This is a canary in a coal mine. Canada, boy, I don't know if you know this, but there's no mortgages really in Canada. Not that as we know them. We have our 15-year and 30-year, et cetera. They have 1, 2, 3, 5, and if you're really lucky, a 10-year mortgage, which means mortgages need to roll, which means when they roll, if rates are higher, you're kind of SOL as a homeowner or a property owner. And if you're in New York, you're really SOL because your property isn't yours, it's the collectives. So, uh, the kids up there in Canada, think about what's going on with the kids in these families. I mean, literally, you have millions of parents in Canada who don't know if they are going to have a home, if they're going to lose their home. But it goes deeper than that because now, in the last 6 months, there's been some court rulings in Canada by liberal communist judges appointed by liberal communist administrators in the Canadian government who've ruled that the indigenous population is really the owner of your home. And I'm talking about wide swaths of territory now. I'm not talking about a little chunk. We're talking about huge swaths of Canada. And if you have a 2-year or a 1-year or a 3-year or a 4-year, in other words, a short term mortgage, which basically everybody in Canada has, given that cloud on ownership because of this court ruling, that your house and your land really belongs to the indigenous people and not to you, never mind the fact that you paid for it and paid for the mortgage, etc., and pay the taxes on it. You can't get a mortgage. You can't get refinanced because there's a cloud on your title. And no lender is going to lend you money, as any of you who own property know, unless your property's title is squeaky clean. We'll see what else is going to go on up there too, because Canada is a rat in a toilet bowl vortex that somebody has flushed. It's unbelievable. And I see all these. Have you noticed all the AI videos, by the way? You got to be very careful on YouTube, folks. AI is like half of what you're seeing. Some of it is true, just enough to suck you in, and the rest of it is psyops to get you to believe and or think and or do whatever the person behind that AI wants you to think, do, or believe. You got to be really careful. I mean, really careful. All right. So in Canada, they're also thinking about putting in a 50% exit tax. I guess they have figured out that what they're doing is not good for the country and some people might leave. There's already been a 70% increase, by the way, in migration over the last 5 years from Canada to the United States. So that kind of gives you a clue. And there's a lot of Canadian expats all around the country, particularly Central and South America. So you have your reparations in San Francisco, and you have really kind of a reparations deal going in Canada too, except the folks who are getting these reparations are not getting money in Canada, they're getting your house. Great. But Canada has other stuff going on too. Let me pull this up because I have a good friend up there. They keep me informed of what's happening. And some of this stuff is like unbelievable. Unbelievable. So let's see. Takes a moment to call it up because I am the least tech proficient person you probably have ever met. And that's, I'm sure, saying something. This is some of the things which are actually in Parliament right now in Ottawa that will be voted on in the near future. I've already brought you the story of how they are basically disarming the population even more than they disarmed it in the past, right? The the forced buybacks and you know a 22 rifle being a weapon of war. We got to take it from you. And that started before all these laws came up. Gee, what do you think they knew? Huh? What do you think they knew? All right, let me read some of this to you because it's totally unbelievable. And we'll have this posted on the website too. Bill S206. Okay, they're flooding Parliament with distraction bills. So the public's overwhelmed. They're kind of doing all this at once, right? See how much spaghetti you can throw at the wall and see what sticks. There's a dozen bills, all of them nasty. And by the way, I see this camera is kind of going back and forth. You'll have to put up with it till we get this kind of the technical glitches solved, shall we say. And these bills are attacking the very pillars of freedom and the Canadian Charter. Not that these people really care about the Charter, just like the commies in the United States don't care about the Constitution. Bill S206, which is kind of the key bill of this whole big rush of bills. It enables penalties without hearings or common law protections to be imposed by bureaucrats or the government against you for really whatever they want. Then there's Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, which is undefined harm and digital speech penalties. And the bureaucracy has the enforcement authority. It creates Canadian federal AI and other digital regulators who can issue compliance orders, fines, and all sorts of penalties without any court being involved. Then there's Bill C-52, Beneficial Ownership Transparency. This expands Canadian federal surveillance and administrative enforcement. In other words, it shifts power away from the Parliament to the agencies, kind of the exact opposite of what's happening in the United States, thank God. Bill C-26, the Critical Cyber Systems Act. This is a regulation by order. It bypasses Parliament. And it has to do, once again, with cyber speech. It's kind of like the incredible censorship that's occurring right now in the European Union, particularly in Britain, France, and Germany. I mean, literally, you can go to jail for raising the British flag in Britain right now. Yeah. Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act. It gives the CRTC, that's their kind of their watchdog agency, complete control over content the curation of the contract content, and the digital reach, in other words, the distribution of content in Canada. Then there's Bill C-18, Online News Act. That allows Canadian federal regulators to fine you if you're a digital journalist and you report something they don't like or in a way you don't like it. And then Bill C-234, Agricultural Fuel Restrictions Act. This expands Canadian federal control over farm operations and production. You bet. Kind of like, them wanting to do the ear tag deals. What's going on with this camera? Kind of like them wanting to do the all the ear tag deals, etc. Monitor the farts and flatulence of the cows here in the United States, which fortunately got beat back. Then there's Bill S-241, the Jane Goodall Act. This is a biosafety authority, again by the bureaucracy, over wildlife, land, and, folks, private property. And then Bill C-49, the Atlantic Accord Amendments. This has to do with offshore land, climate restrictions, energy development, which is one of the reasons Canada is broke, because they got lots of energy, but they don't develop it. And freedom of speech and assembly is also getting attacked, by the way. Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. It criminalizes undefined online, quote unquote, harm. Yeah, right. Harm. And empowers the bureaucrats to impose orders that normally only a court could impose. Then there's the Misleading Communications Act. I don't even need to explain that one to you, right? And then the Bill C-70, the Interference Act, Foreign Interference Act. And that gives the Canadian government mass surveillance powers, biometrics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like the European Union is putting in. And of course, all this comes from the City of London, right? The colonial power who's never really gone away, either as to the United States, Canada, or the rest of the world. But we're going to talk about that in our recap of 2025 and my forecast for 2026. So that's what's going on in Canada, folks. And I would not delude yourself with that common thesis that it can't happen here. Okay. That's why I told you about Mondami and his buddy Kami there in New York and the reparations in San Francisco. It is happening here. It is happening. The difference is that America is armed. Canada is not. There's a big difference. All right, Iran. Huge revolution in Iran. This is now in its 11th day. The uprising has taken over at least 5 cities, including Mahab, and if I mispronounce them, my apologies, the second largest city in Iran. As I'm broadcasting to you, there's street battles going on in Tehran. The IRGC, the vaunted Revolutionary Guard, is being dragged out of barracks, beaten, killed. The barracks are being burned. I mean, this is a major mess. I have great videos on this on the website under International, under the audio bar, and under Rat-a-tat-tat. You should really watch them. This is all by foreign news because, heaven forbid, the Western press should cover this. It might give the people ideas, particularly the people in Europe and Canada. Yeah, right. And Mexico. Mexico's a mess. The one good thing about Mexico is they're in a big fight with China over trade, which is good. But Mexico is run by the cartels. And what's happening there politically, well, we'll get into that in my 2026 forecast. How's that? And then, of course, we have the ongoing war, which Trump has tried to solve twice. And he gets it tamped down for a little bit, and then ba-boom, they're back at it, between Cambodia and Thailand. By the way, did you know that Thailand froze 86 million bank accounts a few months back? No warning. Couldn't get your money out. And when you finally got into your bank account, there was less money in it. Mm. Can't happen here, can it, folks? No, not here. And Greenland. This ties into my 2025 forecasts and my 2026 projected forecasts. Greenland is in the radar. It is on the sonar. It is in the crosshairs. And it should be. We'll talk more about that here in just a bit. Venezuela, I don't need to talk about that. That's like the talk of the town right now, with all these talking head pundits who have no idea what they're talking about why it happened and what the result is and whether it was constitutional and blah, 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 blah. It's totally constitutional, period. Not only that, it's legal by precedence. The United States has gone into countries like this with, by the way, far more damage than just in and out, president gone, over 100 times in the last 125 years. So, this is nothing new under the sun, but it needed to be done, and we'll talk about it. One of the things which has come out, which nobody wants to cover in the press, is that Russia, you see all those explosions in the videos. I have videos on the site under the international and under the audio bar. Do you see all those explosions? Well, they were distractions for sure for the SEAL team that extricated Maduro and his wife. But they were also the launching platforms for ballistic missiles, which Russia was installing. Kind of the Cuba Missile Crisis looming, but of 2026 rather than back there in 1962-63. Kennedy and Khrushchev, now Putin and Trump. Mr. Trump did exactly the right thing. And it's great to see the Monroe Doctrine, which is an 1823 doctrine by James Monroe, one of the presidents of the United States, who basically said the Western Hemisphere, which is the Arctic to Tierra del Fuego, the tip of Argentina, way down there in South America, southern South America, is the region of America and no one else. And ironically, that was first implemented by Monroe, by Monroe, because of the Europeans. The attempted colonization by the Europeans of South America. It's funny how circles come full circular. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine. I told you at the beginning of 2025, I'm going to grade myself now on my major projections for 2025. I told you that the Monroe Doctrine would be reestablished and enforced. I think I'm right on that one. And I told you that there would be spheres of influence. I mean, I really believe there's kind of a deal, not that one side or the other isn't going to kind of push the envelope or try and break the deal as we go forward. Everybody does what's in their best interests, particularly if you're a country and you're vying for hegemon status. But basically, China gets Asia, Russia gets Eurasia, and we get the Western Hemisphere. That's kind of the deal. It's one of the reasons I think that, even though Venezuela was kind of a major thing for Russia and China, they haven't done a whole lot about it. Now, China is rattling the saber and selling treasuries, and Russia's doing some other stuff, but not the kind of reaction you would expect. By the way, with two Russian destroyers like docked right there in Caracas while all this was going down, and they didn't do anything. They did zippo, nada, nothing. So we are seeing those spheres of influence, the three, shall we say, regional spheres of hegemons develop in real time. I think I was right on. And by the way, I was the first to bring you that idea. Now everybody's talking about it, which is great. But nobody was talking about it when I brought it to your attention the beginning of last year. But that's the way we're going. Not to say it can't get derailed. De-dollarization. Unfortunately, right on that too. That's accelerating. In fact, the more we push the envelope in the Western Hemisphere, the more the de-dollarization is accelerating. But on the other hand, if you remember, Trump and Besant, the Treasury Secretary, said they wanted a weaker dollar because it helps exports. All part of a grand plan, folks. You know, those who underestimate Trump and how shrewd he is and what a good chess player he is, 4D chess, do so at their own risk. Yeah. I told you the currency would devalue. The dollar is sinking like a stone against most major currencies right now, even though it was higher kind of at mid-year. So I'll give myself an A plus on that too, with all modesty, of course. And a lower dollar is going to mean higher prices. Something else I warned you about. I told you that there would be prosecutions of some of the traders that were involved in Russiagate and that whole nonsense along with COVID. And that is indeed coming to pass. Now, whether the courts let him off or not, but Comey was indicted. Brennan is about to be indicted. He might have been indicted. Several of the other neocons that tried to undermine Trump, sedition and treason, are being indicted. And even Mr. Obama, this is kind of a 2026 forecast, is in the crosshairs. As well he should be, and not just for that. Europe. Told you Europe was done. Beginning of 2025, I said the European Union's going to break apart. I did several shows on it over the course of the year. And NATO was probably going to be toast. Well, here we are. Germany is on its butt economically and politically. So is France. Britain is a total friggin' mess. It's closer to civil war probably than any country in the world. Think about that. And the European Union is toast. They're led by morons, vacuous globalists whose time has passed, but who are unwilling because of the money they get from their graft and corruption, including in Ukraine, to step down or relinquish power. That happened pretty much as I told you it would. We'll get more into that in the 2026 projections. I told you the Ukraine war would not end because China doesn't want it to end. They want the United States tied up in Ukraine so the United States can't be doing other stuff. Trump has kind of sacrificed Ukraine, other than you give us cash, we'll give you weapons. Biz is biz. So I think I was kind of right on that one. I told you Iran was having significant social unrest. I didn't forecast the revolution that's occurring right now and likely to be successful, nor the return of the Shah, which is the likely outcome of what's going on right now. But I gave you a good foreshadow, shall we say. Canada. I told you Canada was a mess. And I stick by my prognostications that there is a fairly good likelihood, we'll talk about it in the upcoming little segment here, of Alberta and Saskatchewan in some way, shape, or form being involved with, partners with, or states of the United States. You know, that 51st state deal. I told you that the left would become unhinged. They would become more and more violent. They would more and more show their colors. And we would more and more discover the fraud by which they have financed their campaigns and election theft. Their treason. Your money and mine has been financing their treason. Terrific. I think I kind of hit that one on the head. You know, I told you that real assets, whether it's commodities or metals or real estate or whatever, fine art, but I mean something real that you can hold in your hand or that you can walk on, was going to be the coming thing as the world de-dollarized, as the currency sunk, and as inflation, don't believe those government numbers, although down from Obama's third term, still going strong. I think I was right on that. You've probably seen what's happening in the commodities markets with copper and gold, and silver and platinum, and you name it, just about everything, particularly if it has any industrial use for AI or associated industries. I told you that the real estate market would start to crack. And unfortunately, for a lot of people in a lot of places, that's exactly what's happening. Some places still remain relatively vibrant, but other places, and I'm talking about residential real estate, are in serious trouble. Some cities are down 40% in terms of price. And inventory has greatly increased. Doesn't matter if you can't buy it, right? Rates too high, not enough income, etc. And I told you that commercial real estate was going to crater. And folks, it's cratered. I mean, there's assets being sold, you know, rental, when I say rental properties, offices, shopping centers, et cetera, for a fraction of their perceived value just a year or two ago. And that's putting stress on the banking system. Another forecast of mine. Now, I did pretty good on those forecasts. The ones I didn't do great on, I thought there'd be a stock market bust by now. But you know, when you pump a lot of money into the system, like the Federal Reserve's been doing covertly and a little bit overtly, you can keep bubbles inflated for a long, long time. But I do forecast that big drop in the stock market for those of you who are in it. I'm not a fan of stocks, never have been. I don't like my money tied to what kind of coffee some guy in Wall Street has on a Monday morning. Not my idea of fun. Commodities, I think, are going to continue to go up. They're going to be very volatile. You know, you're going to see huge spikes in all of them, okay? Whether it's the metals or whether it's cattle or whether it's agricultural goods or you name it. So a very volatile market, but an overall uptrend continuing in commodities in 26. The European leaders, I'm going to go out on a limb on this one. I think by the end of 2026 or the very beginning of 2027, most of the European leaders were, by leaders, I mean, I'm giving these guys way more fluff than they deserve. These people are morons and traitors to their country, I might add, traitors to the civilized and Western world. But they're going to be gone. They may be gone because of a Russian decapitation strike, because they are playing with fire. They are poking the bear way too hard with way too sharp a stick, and they got nothing behind the stick, and the bear knows it. Or they may be ousted politically, or they may be ousted by some type of violent uprising in their country. But you're going to see huge changes in the European Union, in my opinion, in 2026, including its potential disintegration or partial disintegration. Along with it, perhaps NATO. Canada. I'm going to give you odds on this, okay? I give it 4 in 10 that over the course of this year, Alberta and Saskatchewan become either a U.S. state or on the way to it, or sovereign nations under the Canadian Charter, which they are, and trading partners of the United States, or protectorates of the United States for an interim period. 4 in 10. I will give you a 6 in 10 chance that Canada bends the knee to the United States on trade matters, and that their current flirtations with the Chinese on Canadian oil will not be tolerated by the United States. I mean, I don't think SEAL teams will go into Ottawa, but I don't think it's going to be tolerated, particularly with the Monroe Doctrine now in force and effect and being enforced, and the whole triple sphere, triple hegemon, Russia, China, the United States, spheres of influence geographically, evolving very rapidly, very rapidly. I'll give you a 5 in 10 chance that by the end of this year, Greenland will be in some way, shape, or form a U.S. state, a U.S. protectorate, or under more or less complete U.S. control. I'll give you a 9 in 10 chance that will be the case by the end of Trump's term. And there's all sorts of things. There's a great video. In fact, it's from Europe, because once again, our press is going to cover this stuff. No. They'd rather talk about his rhetoric and, shallow. Unfortunately, many Americans are just shallow, and the press is shallower than the many Americans. But there's all sorts of strategic, mineral, Arctic control, and GUD control. GUD is the passage of water between Britain and Iceland and the Arctic. It's that area that Russian warships and Chinese warships have to transgress to get into the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. To get into the North Atlantic and to threaten the United States. There's other considerations too, including space. Believe it or not, Greenland is the second best place on Earth to send and receive satellite and other signals from space. The best is in Norway. All right. Russia and Ukraine. Well, China doesn't want the war ended for the reasons we've discussed, even though I think Russia would really like to kind of get it over with. The Europeans, desperate to cling to their graft and corruption and their power, the vacuous heads at the EU, will do everything they can to sabotage it. And to be honest with you, I would be surprised if the war in Ukraine really ends. I'm not talking about some nonsense ceasefire or whatever in 2026. I think it's going to grind on and on. The Europeans are going to do everything they can to provoke a bigger conflict with Russia, thinking the United States is going to step in and save their ass, which is really a bad supposition, as we'll get to here in a minute. I think there's going to be a high likelihood of a financial crisis, if not in the United States, then in the Western world with European banks or elsewhere in the world. China has its problems too right now. In fact, China has, believe it or not, more debt to GDP than the United States and has more money in the system floating out there than the United States does. But we shall see who buckles first, right? But there's lots of places that this financial cataclysm could happen or be precipitated by. Private banking, which is in deep trouble. Uh, Private banking, by the way, for those of you who don't know who it is blind pools of money that go out and lend money or make investments. Well, what did you expect to happen? And shadow banking, our friends at BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, yeah, who are unregulated, running amok. And then the continued debasement and fall in value of the currency. And then real estate, particularly commercial real estate, could trigger bank failures at mid-level banks that have a lot of commercial real estate mortgages on their books. And residential real estate, if what's happening in certain markets spreads to other markets in the United States. Commodity scarcity, the breaking of supply chains or not enough silver to go around, which is the latest hue and cry from the commodity crowd, or not enough of this, that, or the other. You already know about the rare earths problem that we have. Thank you, Mr. Obama and Mr. Biden and Mr. Clinton. And the stock market cratering, which will have an immediate psychological effect on all these markets and the population and the American consumer, which is 70% of the American economy. I will give you an absolute firm conviction that Venezuela, what you saw happen in Venezuela a few days ago, that will not be the only one this year, folks. There will be others of some nature, form, or content happening. Count on it. The rise of the left here in the United States, they've already substantially risen along with the jihad over there in Europe, is going to get more pronounced. You're seeing it in Minneapolis. You're seeing it in San Francisco. You're seeing it in LA. You're seeing it in New York. You're seeing it in Chicago, for that matter. And it's a combination in terms of these people actually getting voted in, which is unbelievable. It's a combination of voters having lack of knowledge about who they're voting for, what their ideas really are, what the truth of their promises really is, and what communism and socialism is, because people don't have a clue. But there's a lot of resentment out there. Folks who don't have that much against folks who do. And of course, the stuff they stir up, the race and the religion and yada, yada, yada. And there's a lack of hope on the part of particularly the younger part of the US and Western world generation that they're never going to have what their parents had. That they may not own a house until they're 50, if they ever own a house. And that builds resentment. And resentment can play out in strange ways, including at the ballot box. I think there's a very good chance that you'll see capital controls of some type or nature, although masked by some other name in the United States. But I think you will see extensive capital controls in Europe and perhaps extensive capital controls in Canada. And this is when you can't go anywhere. You can't leave the country. You can't get your wealth out of the country. You can't move your wealth into what you want to move it to. You can't own certain things or you can't sell certain things. It can take many forms. And it's going to lead more and more to a centralized digital currency. Perhaps in the United States, such as Tether, backed in part by gold and United States treasuries and other matters. There's a lot of things going in the air. I will guarantee you that by the end of this year, the Chinese system, which is based on gold, will be in full force and effect, and that a significant majority of the world, even more so than now, will move over to that system, unless the United States takes drastic measures to counteract that swing in trust to a gold-backed currency from the Western world's backed by nothing fiat currencies. And then the 2026 midterms. Well, you know, I told you in 2025, actually 2024, I wasn't sure if Trump was going to win, but I thought he was. And I'm going to tell you right now that I'm not sure we're going to keep the House. But I think we are by the narrowest of margins. But that's up to all of us. Remember, on the website and lots of other places, they're now coming out with the 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 10-to-1 campaign contributions. You put in $50, it's $500 for congressional candidates. Get involved, folks. Do everything you can. If you do everything you can and it doesn't go our way, you can at least say, I did everything I can. You don't want to be sitting there the day after Election Day in 2026 and we don't have the House anymore and the entire government and program is bogged down, which, by the way, would be disastrous. I mean, I'm not sure Trump's plan is going to work, but it's the only plan we have. And it's the only plan that can work. So you better hope he continues to be able to prosecute that plan. I think we will hold the Senate. I'm more sure about the Senate than the House. So those are my big forecasts for 2026 and next year at this time. We'll go over those and see how I did. I'll give myself probably a straight A, not an A plus, and maybe an A minus in a couple respects for 2025. We'll see how I did a year from now for 2026. And to be honest with you, there's some of these prognostications I hope I get a solid X on, a solid D, a fail, because I'd like to be wrong. We'll see in a couple days. I'm going to resume the pace of these videos now on the radio show. And make sure you visit the website. We got all sorts of great stuff posted, including a lot from foreign press that you are not going to see in the United States or the Western world, concerning Iran, concerning Greenland, etc. Take a look at them. You'll know more than the average Joe by far, and you need to. And remember Einstein's quote, which is really think outside the box. The safest place to have your ship moored is at the dock, but ships weren't made except for the open sea. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio. Have a great rest of 2026. We'll be talking many times through the course of this year, and hope things went well for you over the holidays. Thank you for listening. It is much appreciated.
Please remember, if you've missed any shows, just click on Show Archive and you'll find all of his shows. We look forward to seeing you here again next week for another episode of Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side.